Welcome to Beyond the Comfort Zone Live.
This is the show where we push leaders to step beyond their comfort zones, challenge their thinking, and accelerate their success.
I'm Aviva Lebo.
I'm Renee Klein.
As Vistage chairs, we've seen firsthand how powerful it is when high caliber leaders come together to push beyond their limits.
Because no matter how much experience you have, you don't know what you don't know. When you're at the top, getting honest, unbiased feedback is tough, and spotting your own blind spots is even tougher.
That's where the magic of peer groups comes in. Our mastermind style groups aren't just about networking, they're about real collaboration, a space where leaders challenge each other, hold each other accountable, and unlock growth they never thought possible.
And that's what this show is about, too. Every episode, we explore ideas, challenges, and leadership breakthroughs to help you make smarter decisions and scale your impact.
So if you are ready to think differently, stretch your limits, and take your leadership to the next level,
Then you're in the right place. Let's go beyond the comfort zone.
our guest today is Ed Johnson. Ed Johnson is a leadership coach and facilitator with 15 plus years of experience helping senior leaders and teams navigate growth and challenge. He brings an authentic, empathetic, and challenging approach to executive coaching, keynote speaking, and leadership development. With a background as a pastor, Ed supports leaders in professional and personal transitions, fostering self awareness, confidence, and a positive mindset. He holds multiple certifications and degrees in coaching, business, and theology. And he's based in Virginia. He enjoys outdoor activities, Peloton workouts, and grilling for family and friends. Without further ado, we'd like to welcome Ed to the show. Ed, thank you for being on Beyond the Comfort Zone.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. And the grilling, we've got to be specific. It's charcoal grilling. All right. It's got to be charcoal grilling. Okay. Let's not miss that.
Ed. Um,
Sorry. Can't help it.
so your path to executive coaching, it's been shaped by your personal experience in leadership and facilitation. I'm curious what led you to this work and how has this approach evolved over time?
Yeah. Thanks for asking. So, I think if I'm going to share that story, I get to go all the way back to really back to 9/11. And so I was out of college a couple years and I was in finance and banking because I figured I was going to go out and make my millions, right? And 9/11 occurred. And at that time, I was also experiencing kind of a return to faith, a return to meaning that I had left several years ago. And I believed that I wanted to do something that was going to have a different sort of an impact in the world. And so the decision that I believe I had was to either join the military or to go be a pastor. And I really, in that time, through some discernment and some practice and conversations, felt led and called. And so off I went to seminary. It was a very quick decision made within about 2 weeks. I went and checked out a seminary, and they gave me a packet of papers, and they said, "Hey, it's due in a week if you want financial aid." And I said, "Well, I don't even know if I'm doing this yet." And sure enough, 1 week later, I turned it in. That was in February, and September, there I was. I was off and running in seminary. So I went and did that. I was in pastoral ministry for just under 15 years. And a part of my role in pastoral ministry, I was really interested in how congregations impacted their communities. And what I discovered was in order to do that, the congregation had to have a clear understanding of who it was and what its purpose was. And not only that, but we had to develop leaders within the congregation, volunteer leaders specifically, that were going to lead the charge to get us in the community because the staff was so significantly small compared to the size of the congregation. So I did that for several years, and then I really enjoyed that work. To be honest with you, Renee and Aviva, it was very meaningful to me. I could see people's lives being changed. I could see a difference in the community. We were at one location, we we're doing a significant amount of work with the homeless population. And so I was getting to provide leadership development for executives and members of the congregation during the week. And then on Saturday morning, I was sitting with someone that was that had no home, right? And it was interesting, the similarity in the conversations that I would get to have with those individuals. So one thing led to another. Life was wonderful and grand, but my level of self-awareness was low, which is what has really inspired me to do what I do now. And there came a time where I was relocated. The work was still amazing, but it was in a different location. And I really, because of my lack of self-awareness, had not paid attention to my personal relationships, particularly in my marriage. And so I ended up leaving pastoral ministry. I left that marriage. And from a personal journey, I had the hardest year of my life. I went back to banking and finance. But while I was there, I had an individual who was a member of one of my congregations that came to me. He said, "Hey, Ed, I just did this coaching thing, and this is what you were doing in the church. You ought to check it out." And so off I went back to school, and I've been doing it ever since.
Wow.
That's
Wow.
the quick version. There's all sorts of more in there, but that's the quick version.
You have been on a journey and have such experience from in different backgrounds. I know now that you specialize in coaching executives navigating high stake relationship transitions while maintaining leadership responsibilities. What unique challenges do they face, and what shifts them to regain and helps them regain clarity, confidence, and effectiveness, would you say?
Yeah. So the term that I like to use when thinking about individuals that are in the space is a relational paralysis. And what I've discovered is that persons in high positions of responsibility to others, to their family, and to themselves, when they get into these relationship transitions, they can almost get paralyzed because so many questions arise. They can lose their confidence. Begin to develop questions around, what is my family going to look like on the other side of this if this does lead to a separation or a divorce? They have questions around, what is my leadership going to look like? And what I have found is that in that space, there's a significant amount of chaos. Uh, and having experienced that myself, you also get surprised by the people that walk with you and the people that don't walk with you. Right. And so my opportunity is to step alongside these individuals. I don't take the place of a therapist. I certainly don't take the place of a lawyer, but I'm able to walk alongside these individuals and help them to explore the landscape, both from a place of their leadership of themselves, of the organization, of their family, so that they can create what's going to be next on the other side of that. And so once they get to the other side of that, they have their confidence back, they have clarity, and they have a shift in their leadership. They've also developed empathy that they didn't have before. And I've seen some significant results on the other side there. Yeah.
Very cool.
Amazing niche to be a part of and support leaders in that way.
Yeah.
One of the core reasons we brought you on here today is you're certified positive intelligence coach. And
Yeah.
I have been a strong believer in positive intelligence for many years myself, and share a little bit of what it's done for me over time in this conversation. But it's something I really wanted to expose our viewership to, because I think it's just such an amazing way to create that self-awareness, and help with mindset things we talk about on the show a lot, especially for executives. So,
Yeah.
Ed, can you share a little bit about what positive intelligence is and just kind of start off there?
Absolutely. So, positive intelligence is based off of a book. The author is Shirzad Shamim, and the title of the book is Positive Intelligence. And the basic premise of the book is this: there are things that we want to accomplish, things that we want to do, things that we want to see, so on and so forth. However, the actions that we take or the things that we do that we think will get us those things actually prohibit us from achieving those things. And so Shirzad has, through all sorts of scientific research and whatnot, which we can go into, and there's white pages and everything available on his website, but has narrowed it down to a total of 10 saboteurs that afflict us, and then also 5 sage powers, which enable us to be our authentic selves, right? And so the first of those saboteurs is the judge. And the judge is an equal opportunity offender. And what I mean by that is we all experience the judge, all right? And we experience the judge in 3 different ways. Either of you want to take a stab at the 3 different ways?
I can definitely.
Yeah, go for it.
Well, there is probably our favorite that I see most in leaders, which is judge of self, because we're all
Yeah,
very high achievers and we're harder on ourselves probably than anybody else. There's judge of others, right? So all the people we are also hard on, or and then judge of circumstance, which
you
is
got it.
all of the things we judge in life. As
Yeah,
far as we'll be happy when these things happen, and yet we're still never happy because when those
yeah,
happen, there's always the next one.
yeah, yeah, you got it. So judge of self is any thoughts or things that we might even say out loud that denigrate ourselves. And it might be over past decisions. It might over be past mistakes. It might be over future expectations of where we might falter, where we might fall. It might be negative thoughts about our appearance. It might be negative thoughts about how we parent, about how we lead, about conversations that we've had. Anything that's negative, that is a negative thought about ourselves, is a judge of self, right? And then we have judge of others. And the judge of others can seem, I like to suggest, it can seem as indiscriminate as I'll confess, I've seen someone walking down the street before. Like, should they really be wearing that? Right? Like that's a judgment, right? And the reality is that's probably not hurting anyone except me because I'm the one that's had the thought and it's a negative thought. But can also be as detrimental as, let's say, you have a colleague or even an employee that shows up late to a meeting 5 days in a row. A judgment would be something along the lines of so and so is lazy, right? That's a story we've made up about the situation. Discernment would simply be so and so is late. Once we shift, if we make that discernment, so and so is late, we can then activate and get curious and have a conversation if we so choose. Whereas if we decide or judge that someone is lazy, we then interact with them differently, right? We interact with them based off of the story that we've created. So that's the judge, equal opportunity offender, right? And then we have these 9 accomplished saboteurs. Don't be alarmed. We don't have to worry about all of them. We all have about 2 or 3 that afflict us the most. They are called things such as the hyperachiever, the avoider, the restless, the stickler, the pleaser, the controller, hyper rational, all these negative sounding things. And they all, again, they prohibit us from achieving those things we want to achieve. And so, one of the big teachings that he shares with us is negative emotions. And the way that we know that a saboteur, either the chief saboteur, the judge, or the chief saboteur and some of those accomplished saboteurs are interacting, is if we're experiencing a negative emotion. Mm. And so, anytime we're experiencing a negative emotion, frustration, anger, guilt, boredom, stress, any negative emotion is a signal that the saboteurs are active in our lives or active in our mindset in that space right there. So I can keep talking about this for about 45 minutes. So you tell me what other questions you've got, or I'll just keep running.
I want to just ask one question
Yeah.
about what you just mentioned.
Yeah.
Can you help us understand a little bit more how our saboteurs, they can, is it accurate to think they're healthy till they're not? So they can
Good
help
question.
serve us until it's negative?
Yeah. So you're touching up on something that a lot of folks ask, and some folks want to say, "Oh, it's my stickler." So let's use the stickler as an example. So the stickler is this relentless drive to perfection. Everything's got to be just right, T's crossed, I's dotted. Everything's got to be perfect, right? And so some folks will say, "Oh, well, this is the good side of my stickler. It's okay." And the reality is, if there is any sort of negative emotion connected with it, it is not.
Okay.
If there's any negative emotion connected with it, then that means that your saboteur is active. Okay. However, what you are alluding to is this statement right here. The accomplished saboteurs that afflict us. So when we're talking about the accomplished saboteurs, we're talking about those 9. We're not talking about the chief saboteur, the judge, but these 9, whichever the top 2 or 3 are. It is the overuse or the misuse of our greatest strength. Right? So the key indicator is what's the emotion behind it.
That's helpful. And I know that, these saboteurs play a huge role in positive intelligence. And we're curious, what are the most common ones you see in high-performing executives? And how do they impact both their leadership and personal relationships?
Yeah. So there's three that come right to mind very quickly. One of them is the stickler, which we've discussed a little bit. But what happens with the stickler is the stickler is this drive to having everything absolutely perfect. And so, from a personal level, when someone's afflicted by the stickler, it can lead to workaholic tendencies. Because what happens is they'll get stuck in a project and they'll spend so much time in it trying to get it absolutely perfect that they'll completely zone out and they'll miss out on all sorts of other things. But what happens is because they're so focused on getting that project absolutely right, they end up making mistakes. And then it ends up not being perfect, right? So that's an impact for themselves and also on part of their leadership. But then it trickles down also because if I show up as a leader of an organization as a stickler, and if I give someone an assignment, but every time they give me the assignment back, it's not right, and I redo it, then what are they going to start doing? They're going to, hey, you're going to redo it anyway. Here, let me put something together and give it to you, right? And then you end up with even more work, and you get back into your zone, and you miss out more on your personal life or your family or whatnot. So that's a very brief piece with a stickler. Another one that I experience a lot is the hyperachiever. And the hyperachiever is this continuous setting of goals and accomplishing these goals, but not celebrating those goals. And so it's always, all right, we got to get this. We got to get this. It's this relentless drive. Folks that are afflicted by the hyperachiever can usually rally the troops, if you will. However, the troops get exhausted because you finish one thing and then you already have set the goal for the next thing and you never even celebrated that last thing, right? The hyperachiever also really looks to others to tell them that they're okay. And so the hyperachiever, what's interesting about the hyperachiever saboteurs, it's really, really prevalent within Western society. And the reason being is because of the high emphasis that we put on education. The phrase I like to use, I got this from a guy named Reggie McNeil years ago. Now, don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with education, right? But what I am saying is when we put the emphasis on you have to have this certification, you have to have this degree, you have to go through this class before it's okay for you to do this thing, then we naturally create that saboteur within folks, right? Personal example for me, years ago when I was going through the process to be a pastor, right? I was in the United Methodist Church at the time, and the ordination process took like 9 to 12 years. But along that process, there's certain markers that you make. And when you make those markers, you get to go ahead and be a pastor within a local church, even though you're not fully ordained, right? One of my top saboteurs is the hyperachiever. And I remember even once I reached that mark and I had all the pastoral authority within the congregation, I still held back because they hadn't come out and totally told me, hey, you're there, right? So folks end up holding back sometimes with a hyperachiever, or they wait for others to tell them they're okay. And so we give away all sorts of authority from that space. And then the other one that I see a lot in leaders is the controller. And the controller, folks that are afflicted by the controller, they're able to really get things done and organized, but it's such a push that they stifle the creativity of their team, right? Because they're the ones, they know how it should be done. And then folks around their team, they don't come up with different ideas of how those things can be done. So,
Yeah, it's amazing. And I would say in my coaching, I see those three things all the time. So it is very interesting to see how they play out and how they shape people's leadership, what those interactions look like with their team members. Um, so, it is interesting. I love the phrase that you said earlier, like this is their greatest strength that kind of flips to weakness.
mhm.
One of the things that I love in positive intelligence, and I'd love for you to dive into a little bit, is the analogy of putting your hand on a hot stove, right? Like emotions are
Yeah.
good to a point, but how do you know when your saboteur is active, and like what do you do to switch and transform it?
Yeah. Yeah. So Shirzad gives this example in his book. When I share the story, I share it from a personal example because I had it happen with my oldest son. And so when my oldest son was about 5 or 6 years old, I was cooking. It was not charcoal because I was in the house, but it was a gas stove, cast iron skillet. And I was on the other side of the kitchen. I saw him approaching the stove and he went over to it. He reached up and he touched that cast iron skillet. And what happened? Or what do you think happened?
Moved his hand back immediately.
He yanked his hand off, right? And so the reason he yanked his hand off was because of the pain that he felt when his hand began to burn, right? And so when we talk about the effectiveness of negative emotions, we like to also talk about the effectiveness of pain. And so the question that we ask is, well, is pain beneficial for you? And the reality is, it's beneficial for you for a moment, right? He felt it, hand off, hand gets to safety, right? He didn't leave his hand on there. Why is the stove hot? Is someone cooking? Are they supposed to be like you don't try to figure out all those things while you're continuing to feel the pain, because if you do, your hand burns even worse. It could catch fire, could get mutilated, you could lose use of it. And so in similar fashion, negative emotions are beneficial for us for a split second, because it makes us aware that there is something going on in our environments that needs our attention. But too often when we're an autopilot, right, or when we're not aware of who we are or how we show up, we stay in that negative emotion and we try to resolve the situation while we're frustrated. We try to resolve the situation while we're angry, while we're bored, while we're jealous, whatever it might be. And what happens is we end up escalating the situation, which changes the outcome that everyone around us experiences.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite analogies to give and talk about in coaching, because different than the immediate reaction of hand off hot stove, which is just natural human nature. Like, I don't think there's another person on this planet who's going to say, I'll leave my hand on the hot stove. But we all leave ourselves sitting in negative emotions. We process, we vent, we have to like get it out that way. And we think that's the way to solve it. One of the things that I greatly took away from positive intelligence is that it doesn't get you anywhere. You have to shift your mindset to do the work. To kind of remove, step back, notice the saboteur that is afflicting you in the moment. And then you can do the work to shift the situation or deal with it. So I'm curious, Ed, if you're willing to share with our guests a way, tip or trick or something that can help someone when they're going up hot stove. What gets them to help them take their hand away? So if you can walk us through an exercise or something that can share that, I would love it.
Yeah. So I'm gonna share one little piece around that, and then we'll do the exercise. The first step in this is to catch the negative emotion. Now, we put our hand on a hot stove, it's hot, we notice it right away. But one of the things that I've experienced with many of my clients is sometimes we don't realize how many negative emotions we're experiencing, right? So the first step is to begin that self-awareness of just kind of checking in, hey, what am I feeling right now, right? When we are feeling that negative emotion, it's the intentional work of stepping aside from that negative emotion and learning how to shift. And so the way that Shirzad teaches us to do that is something that he refers to as PQ reps, or positive intelligence reps. All right. The definition that I like to use for that is it is at minimum 10 seconds, focused attention on any one of our five senses. Okay. Now, this is not necessarily a natural practice for us. It's something that we build into, right? But what's beautiful about this is when we do this, and if it's okay, we'll practice it here in a few minutes. But when we do this, what we're doing is we're training our mind to get to that same space that our mind gets to when we do meditation or perhaps even deep prayer, right? But the reality is, if we're in the middle of a board meeting and somebody on the other side of the table says something and we get triggered, we can't Tebow timeout, leave the boardroom, jump in our meditation room, get all kumbaya and together, and then come back and be okay. And so part of this practice is learning how to shift in the moment and developing the capacity to shift in the moment, right? And so it's these PQ reps. And so what Shirzad teaches us is we do PQ reps throughout the day, even when we don't need them, so that when we do need them, we can access that space in our mind even quicker, right? So you want to try some PQ reps?
Absolutely. Let's show everybody. My only challenge is, because we got to get everybody beyond their comfort zones if you're watching the show, is if we're watching this, I'm sure you can relate to some of the things you heard earlier, even if it's uncomfortable to do so. So I want you to try this at home. So join in and follow what Ed says.
Yeah. So the reality is we can see each other. They can see us, but we can't see them. So you can do this and you don't have to worry about what it looks like. We're going to do it and not worry about what we look like either, okay? At one point during the practice, I'm going to talk about touching our fingers together. And this is all that I'm referring to right there. All right. And we'll do a couple other things, but just follow along. And this is a little bit of a trust exercise as well. So first thing, I'll just invite us all to just go ahead and gently close our eyes. And go ahead and get your spine straight, but not stiff. And let's take a deep breath in. 1, 2, 3, and then release. 3, 2, 1. One more deep breath in. 1, 2, 3, and release. 3, 2, 1. Now I invite you to allow your breath to return to its normal pace. And see if you're able to breathe in and out through your nose. And as you're doing so, bring your attention to the temperature of the air as it enters your nostrils compared to the temperature of the air as it exits your nostrils. And let's simply focus on that sensation for a moment. If your thoughts drift away, that's all right. Just gently bring it back. Focus on the air as it enters and as it exits your nostrils. Then I'll invite you to touch the tips of your fingers together and to rub them with such an intensity that you can feel the ridges of your fingerprints. And again, we'll simply focus on that sensation for just a moment. Again, if your mind drifts, just gently bring it back. Focus on the ridges of your fingerprints. And whenever you're ready, I'll invite you to take a deep breath in. As you exhale, allow your eyes to naturally open and go ahead and reacquaint yourself with your space. Renee,
Yes,
I don't know that you've ever done this before.
I have not.
Tell me what the experience was like for you, if that's all right.
Well, I just thank you for that gift of a pause and to recenter myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't imagine what would happen if I did that on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I have 5 children, and because this is what I get to do, they get exposed to this stuff, right? And one of my kids, it was a Taco Tuesday about 2 years ago. That's how I remember this very specifically. We're sitting at the table, and at that time in his life, he liked to go around the table and ask everybody how their day was. But he started with the least important person, which was his youngest brother, and then he worked his way around to himself. And at this particular meal, he began the story with, "Well, I got up this morning." And as soon as he said that, I knew we were in for like a long story, right? Like he's starting with like, "I crawled out of the bed." Okay. So he gets to about mid-morning of his telling his story, and he loses his train of thought, like completely loses where he is. And he's, some of us, when we get flustered, the redness comes to our face. He's one of those. And I just saw his face turn beet red, right? He just was stuck. And so I pat him on the shoulder and said, "Come here, buddy." So he came over and said, "All right, close your eyes, deep breath. All right. Touch your fingers, focus on, we did that. Put your hand on your abdomen, notice the rise and fall of each breath." Pat him on the shoulder and said, "All right, buddy, whenever you're ready, open your eyes." So he kind of sat up. I went back to my taco salad. He opened his eyes and shared the rest of the story just like that. As soon as we got out of that negative frustration, he knew exactly where he was, right? I'll tell you one other quick story. This was an afternoon. And four of the five boys were in the family room. I heard a crash, I heard a bang, I heard a boom. I got triggered. I did no PQ reps. I stormed in there, right? And I said, "Hey, what am I going to say to you guys?" And one of my sons looked up at me. He said, I know, Daddy, but I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. Right. And I tell that story because of this. One of the things that I love about the practice of positive intelligence, and there's a lot that we haven't gone into, like the sage powers and so on and so forth, like what we do once we shift. But what it does is it enables us to develop a self awareness, and then it gives us the option to choose or to be intentional about how we show up. There are some situations where we might catch our negative emotions and like, yeah, I don't care. This is the way I'm going to show up. But it's different to choose to show up that way than to just blindly walk through life and show up triggered and going off at the hip, so on and so forth, right? The other thing that I really appreciate about positive intelligence, and I had someone years ago as a supervising pastor, he came up to me and he said, "Ed, all these preachers out there are giving us all these should sermons. We don't need should sermons. We need how-to sermons." Mm-hmm. And I think positive intelligence is a how-to with regards to leadership. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying any other leadership books aren't good or anything like I read many of them just like you do, right? But this is a specific how-to. It's a practice. It's something that we can develop. It's something that we can do with others. And it's something that enables us to be a more authentic version of ourselves, if you will.
Yeah, it's something I'll share, having practiced this now for a few years myself. I mean, you'll see all my mindset videos and all of that. This really is a huge part of who I am and my leadership style. That's been so helpful to me. But it's easy to shift or be able to say the things Renee just said, right? When we came in a relatively calm space, although I don't know how high pressure a show is for her or for me, right? But I've done this in the heat of the moment. And you don't have to stop and do this. Like literally, I can be staring at the screen, at the camera, in my own eyes, and look at the details in it, and it will shift me just the same. So yes, under the table you could be feeling your fingers, but you literally can keep your eyes wide open and still be doing something. Stare at the pupils of the person across from you. So there's so many ways to do this. Ed just showed you a very small one, so I just want to put that out there. If this is interesting to you, definitely explore it further and understand what you really can do in the depths of BQ work. But you can be sitting in a meeting, getting so frustrated with somebody you're listening to, and shift and change the conversation so easily. And I can't tell you the number of times I've been in a tough situation or coaching situation where I'm just getting stuck. I'm not sure what the next question to ask is, or in a board situation, right? Like it's frustrating. And it really does make a difference. I can just speak to that from personal experience. It's amazing the things you come up with when you just give yourself a second to shift. So it doesn't take long.
No. And you alluded to, when we talk about at least 10 seconds of focused tension on any one of our five senses, just what you alluded to, your eyes, you're listening, right? You're tasting with food. We've had folks that I've heard Shirzad refer to that have lost a ton of weight because they started doing PQ reps on every bite of the food that they were taking, right? It changed their entire eating experience, if you will, right? Touch, sound, listening, some combination thereof. I've had folks that will take walks during the day as a part of their normal, well-being routine that have now shifted those walks to being PQ walks, right? So they're really listening to the sound of their sneaker, of their shoe, hitting the asphalt or stepping on the leaves, or they'll listen to the wind, or they'll pay attention to the different colors of the leaves and the trees that they're seeing, or the different nuances of the sky, so on and so forth.
Yeah. Or the birds you never hear chirping because they're toned out in your background. And when you're walking, like you actually pay attention to them, which is really interesting. The other, like, I'll give a personal example too, because those are always fun. So I have a 7-year-old boy. Some of you probably know that by now. And we all know you get in the car with your kid after school and they've either had a great day and you're like in a great conversation, or they've had a terrible day and they are taking it out on you right and left. And it's really hard when you're in a good space to get that I've had a terrible day right and left, like shift that happens immediately. So my favorites is he's in the back seat and I know all of a sudden like my just heart sank because I've got that terrible mood in the back, and I'm like, oh, I don't even know how to help or support him right now. Steering wheels have those nice little stitches on them, and I literally will do this to the steering wheel for a few minutes while I'm driving and
Right.
just focus on that. Still focusing on the road, don't get me wrong, no
Yeah.
car accidents yet. Um, but it gives me the clarity in those days and times to know how to support him instead of just get frustrated with him and be like, oh, tonight's going to be a terrible night. Like,
Yeah.
because that's the first gut thought. Tonight's going to be a terrible night. And instead, so there's so many uses, home purposes, business purposes. Um,
Yeah.
I know we don't have time to get into Sage today, so just know this is like the tip of the practice. There's so many more things you can do, but I wanted to give at least
Yeah.
an actionable tip to our listeners today. So thank you so much, Ed, for walking us through that
Yeah.
and sharing it. Um, want to make sure that let's see, what else can we dive into?
I just was curious,
Yeah.
someone's hearing this, that's listening and say, I'm ready to feel different or I'm ready to be different. What's the next best step for them, whether it's for personal or professional? What
Yeah.
do you recommend?
Well, I think there's several different things that folks can do. One option is always go get the book and read the book and begin to try to implement this yourself, right? One of the things that I have learned is the power of doing this or learning things within community. And so there is the opportunity for folks to do this within a group of others, whether it's within your organization or a friend group or whatnot. And Shirzad's actually developed it's a 7-week program. Sometimes we refer to it as mental fitness boot camp. But it's a little bit, it's not intense from the sense of incredibly time intensive, but it is intense from the perspective of you're working on you. And some of the opportunities, the leadership opportunities that I do within organizations, it's all about everybody and how we work together. Positive intelligence, the first step is working on yourself. And so that first 7 weeks is all about you, right? How do I begin to make shifts? What do I get to learn about myself? What are the PQ reps that work for me? Which are the top saboteurs that afflict me? How do I access my sage powers? How do I be intentional about how I show up, either in my personal life or my professional life, right? The other thing you can do is anybody can go take the assessment. And so if you just Google saboteur assessment, boop, it's going to pop right up for you. There's also another assessment that's connected there that folks don't necessarily find as often, but it has to do about your ratio of negative thoughts to positive thoughts. And what we're looking for is we want to be above that 75% percentile so that our brain's working for us 3 times more often than not. And so sometimes I'll have folks that I work with do that assessment before we go through the program, and then also have them do it after the program, and they can see tangibly how much of a shift they've made, right? One of the things that I'm willing to do for folks that are listening to the podcast, I think we're going to drop the link in the chat or somewhere, but I am always willing to spend 60 minutes with somebody just to have a conversation and to explore the specific saboteurs that are afflicting you. And to possibly enable you to develop a little bit of a plan of how you might work on that yourself as well. So, yeah.
That is amazing, Ed, because that is such a gift of time. 60 minutes is a lot to gift people, but I really appreciate it. So if this is speaking to you, to take that
Yeah.
assessment, I'll put the link in the chat and I'll reach out to Ed. Take the
Yeah.
gift of his time. How wonderful is that? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure. I'm excited. I'm obviously pretty passionate about this. And I tell folks this is not life changing because I think that's too broad, too braggadocious, but it can be life altering. It truly can be life altering.
Yeah. Before we conclude, I just want to say, I do think that, like, as leaders, we owe it to ourselves to show up as the best version of ourselves. And I think this helps us do that. Ed, you're a guest on the show Beyond the Comfort Zone. So you get to answer the final question that everybody asks.
Oh,
What is something that's beyond your comfort zone that you've never done before?
I need to do some PQ reps, I think. Let me think. Something beyond my comfort zone that I've never done before. Hmm. I don't know. I know a lot of folks that have done this, and even quite a few executives, but I'm not sure I'd be willing to jump out of a perfectly good plane.
Oh,
I'm
it's
with you,
so
Ed.
much fun. Oh,
I just don't know that I'd be up for that, right?
Okay. If either of you change your mind on that, I'd be glad to take you. I've done it a couple times and it's a lot of fun.
She'll take us under her wing, no pun intended.
Yeah. I would just turn it into an entire PQ rep session. Close my eyes,
Okay.
just feel the wind on my
Yeah.
face, and yeah.
Oh my goodness.
I'm just picturing that now. That is absolutely amazing.
Uh,
Ed's info is in chat, so you've got all of that if you want to stay connected and learn more. If you want to get to know us more about our peer groups, that information is in chat as well. Thank you so much, Ed, for joining us today. It's
Absolutely.
just
Thank you,
been an
Ed.
absolute honor.
My
And
pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And thank you to everyone else who has joined us today watching this podcast. Until next time on Beyond the Comfort Zone, we encourage all of our viewers to try something new outside of your comfort zone because that's where growth occurs and life begins. Have a great day, everyone.